250 years ago, a large group of people approached 3 ships here in the British colony of Massachusetts.
They moved more like a military unit than a mob. Through the dark of a winter's night, hundreds of men marched stealthily through the wharves of Boston Harbor with purpose. There was treason afoot, or patriotism. It was December the 16th, 1773, and here in Boston, the men were about to strike the spark of revolution. What happened here that night was the culmination of a crisis that had spread across 3 continents, from Bengal to the banks of the Thames to Boston Harbor. This is the story of an event that shook an empire and helped forge the United States. This is Boston, one of the great natural harbors of North America. Safe anchorage in all weathers, access to the huge pine forests of New England, so perfect for shipbuilding, but also access to the huge cod fisheries of the North Atlantic, almost limitless supply of food. In the 18th century, this was the capital of one of Britain's North American colonies. The future looked bright, but on the ground, things weren't quite that simple.
There's a problem. Despite all this potential, the colony of Massachusetts and many of the other colonies here on the eastern seaboard are not making money. Yes, some people here are getting rich, but the British Crown isn't making any profit out of this brave new world. I'm starting my exploration ashore in Boston, in a key place for the exchange of ideas, both loyalist and revolutionary. The pub.
The roots of the Boston Tea Party can be traced back to another refreshing tipple, although one a little bit stronger than a nice cup of tea. Rum. Rum was made here in Massachusetts in enormous quantities, created from the sugar coming from the Caribbean, where it was grown by enslaved Africans on plantations. The problem with Massachusetts sugar is that much of it came from the French islands like Martinique and Guadeloupe. In 1733, the British government had passed the Molasses Act. It was a huge bit of protectionism designed to boost the fortunes of the British plantations in the Caribbean by slapping very high tariffs on sugar grown elsewhere. The trouble is, it didn't really boost the British plantations at all. It boosted smuggling. People from Massachusetts and New England would go down to the French Caribbean, buy up loads of cheap sugar and bring it here, landing it without paying any tariffs at all. Everyone was involved in the illicit trade, including governors and their sidekicks. It's just a reflection of the fact that the people here in Massachusetts, they weren't really that bothered with following British rules and regulations.
But while there were grumblings in the bars and on the streets, at first things were reasonably calm in the official heart of government in Boston, the State House, where I'm meeting Professor Bob Allison of Suffolk University.
What does the setup, the architecture of the building we're in now, tell us about how this colony was run, where power lay?
So this is the old State House, also called the Townhouse. It was built in 1713 to be the seat of the Massachusetts provincial government. I don't say the royal government because Massachusetts is a province. The Assembly chooses a council to advise the governor, and the governor is appointed by the Crown. And they try to make sure the interests of the empire and the interests of Massachusetts are aligning, and for most of this period, they are. There's no real conflict because he's from Britain, because we're all British. We love the empire.
But times and global power politics were changing. the British Empire was getting bigger and bigger, and that was making things very complicated.
The 1760s, Britain had a big problem, and strangely, it was a problem born out of enormous success. Britain had just fought and won pretty much the most successful war in its history, the 7 Years' War, from the mid-1750s to the early 1760s. British fleets and armies had won victories all over the world. Here in North America, where it's remembered as the French-Indian War, Brits and their American colonial allies had driven the French out of great swathes of what is now Canada and the American Midwest. Britain had a huge empire, but she also had enormous debts. It had been a very expensive enterprise. And that meant from the 1760s, Britain needed to work out how to run this empire, how to make it pay for itself, which meant that from that point on, the big decisions affecting a colony like Massachusetts here wouldn't be taken in Boston. They'd be taken in London. Politicians here in Westminster weren't just dealing with the complaints of Boston merchants and other malcontents. They were handling a whole host of problems, some of which were a lot closer to home. One in particular had sprung up in the financial heart of the British Empire. About a mile from here, the City of London. This is Leadenhall, and this was the site of the surprisingly small main building of a massive imperial cash cow, the East India Company. Now, its trading interests may have been way out in India and the Far East, but the big decisions were taken here in its global headquarters.
At its height in the 18th century, the East India Company accounted for around half of the world's trade.
The East India Company is long gone from here now, but it's still an important financial centre. Lots of operations like banks and insurance companies. But the 18th century East India Company was just on a different scale to these businesses. It was a mighty pillar of the British state. The company paid the British government hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, both on the taxes raised from its imports, things like tea, but also the lump sum required for its operating licence. The East India Company was responsible for around 10% of the British government's annual revenue.
Today, the site of the East India Company is taken up by the steel and glass of the Lloyd's Insurance Building. 250 years ago, people right here would be making decisions affecting the original World Wide Web of ships, traders, warehouses, cash, and credit.
The East India Company traded commodities like cotton, silk, spices, and tea. Great mounds of the stuff was brought in from China. All of it carried in ships to London here, the world's port, and then stored in these vast warehouses. It was brought up from the river by porters or in trolleys and carts, so that these alleys and lanes were humming with the produce of the world.
But the East India Company was also in a bit of a mess, like a vast startup that had got out of control. Hugely profitable in India, but with powerful rivals and chaotic venal management. To get to grips with this powerful multinational, I'm meeting East India Company expert, Dr. Ben Gilding.
There is obviously a huge and growing market for goods like tea, especially in Britain, but there's a huge smuggling market. And so the Dutch East India Company, the French East India Company, the Swedish East India Company, they're all sending back goods as well to Europe. And many of those are providing the goods for smugglers, especially in tea.
Some East India Company tea was sold in Britain, where it was taxed, but lots more was re-exported to Europe and the rest of the world, including across the Atlantic.
Over 3,000 miles away, Boston now found itself as one of the key gateways into a vast new British North American empire. But that empire needed troops, a standing army of 10,000 men to defend and control it, and all that cost money. Now, the idea of politicians in London was that at least some of that revenue should be raised here in North America. But an idea that sounded so simple to politicians in England was a little more controversial on the streets and in the taverns of New England.
One of the main causes of discontent was that the decisions about these taxes weren't being made in Boston. They were coming top down from London.
Britain now has a huge North American empire, and that requires some running. It requires troops stationed on the frontier. They need money.
They do need money. And then in 1765, the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act does affect everyone. Sugar Act really affects you directly if you're a sugar importer. And that means you're fairly well off. The Stamp Act affects everybody. If you buy a newspaper, newspapers have a 1 shilling tax, marriage licenses, college diplomas, dice and playing cards also. We're also taxing those vices, but also to become a lawyer, you need to pay £50 for the stamp on your legal certificate. So the Stamp Act actually targets publishers and lawyers, who are probably two groups you don't want to alienate right off the bat. But here, local propagandists make this into a much broader thing. Thomas Hutchinson, the lieutenant governor, reports his servants afraid to go out at night for fear of the Stamp Act, this mysterious thing that is going to tax everybody. And Andrew Oliver, Hutchinson's brother-in-law, is appointed to be one of the tax agents. And in August, rumor spreads through town, the stamps have arrived. They're at his warehouse. Several hundred guys go to the warehouse on the night of August 14th and tear it down. This is a 2-story brick building. The stamps aren't in there, but they destroy the warehouse. And then the next day, they invite Mr. Oliver to come to their gathering place, a big tree in the south end of Boston. And hanging from the tree is an effigy of Mr. Oliver, noose around his neck, holding a sign, "Death to the Stamp Tax." And they ask him if he wants to keep his position as a tax collector, and he says, no, he's resigning.
The Stamp Act was a failure. Not a penny was raised. But the British government remained determined to show it was the ultimate authority in the American colonies. New taxes aimed at specific goods were on their way.
2 years later, Parliament chooses to tax again with the Townshend duties, named for Charles Townshend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, taxing lead, paint, glass, tea. And these are all things the colonies have to import. Now, Governor Francis Bernard knows what happened the last time there were taxes like this, so he says, I'm going to need military support, actually, to enforce this. So General Gage in New York sends 2 regiments of British troops to Boston to keep the peace.
To try and get Boston under control, the British government finally sent in the army in late 1768. But unsurprisingly, flooding these narrow streets with thousands of young, red-coated soldiers did not have the desired effect.
The arrival of the British Army in force was presented by people like the engraver, Paul Revere, almost as an occupation. Soldiers pouring ashore, and warships filling the harbour. Tensions rose, and by early 1770, there was frequent trouble on Boston's icy streets. Redcoats were picked on and beaten up by gangs of locals. British authority was being challenged.
It all reached a head on the 5th of March, right here in the heart of British power, just outside the State House. A British sentry was guarding the hated customs building. It stood right next door. He was abused by a young kid. It escalated. A big mob of Bostonians gathered. More redcoats rushed to the scene. They abused the British soldiers. They spat on them. They pushed them around. They provoked them.
What happened next became known as the Boston Massacre. Engraved by Paul Revere as a well-drilled assault on the people of Boston.
it didn't really happen like that in reality. Instead, scared young redcoats, a lad called Hugh Montgomery, discharged his musket into the crowd. A few of his fellow soldiers followed suit. There was no order to do so, but that ragged, disorganised volley killed 3 men instantly and left 2 mortally wounded. There was certainly no tyrannical master plan to mow down Americans in the streets. The fact remains that British redcoats had just killed unarmed Bostonians right here in front of the State House. The city went berserk. The Sons of Liberty had an incendiary moment, and they intended to make the most out of it.
Paul Revere was in no doubt that fault lay with the hated taxes and their enforcers. He renamed the Customs House Butcher's Hall and showed a gun firing from the building itself. Sam Adams railed that the massacre was the bitter fruit of arbitrary power, not under the control of civil authority. And there's a huge irony. News hadn't arrived yet in Boston, but on the very day of the massacre, in London, Britain had actually repealed the Townshend Acts. All except one, the tax on tea.
So the same day here, the British troops are firing into a crowd, precipitating this other crisis. Parliament is backing down or doing something you think would appeal to these folks.
But it was too late. The damage had been done. To calm matters, British troops were withdrawn to a nearby fort. But the Sons of Liberty were in the ascendant in Boston itself, and gaining support in the countryside, despite their secretive approach. Unintentionally, the Townshend Act's duty on tea had put this innocent drink at the heart of the crisis. At Boston's Tea Party Museum, you can still sample a mug of hot 18th century style colonial brew.
Everyone knows that the Americans love a good cup of tea. Well, they did in the 18th century anyway. Tea was growing in popularity in Boston at the time. It was exotic. It was from the far side of the world, grown and produced exclusively in China, and the Chinese kept the secrets of that production very close to their chest. The British hadn't yet learned how to steal it and transplant it in other parts of South Asia. And these were the 5 different types of Chinese tea that had been carried in those ships here to Boston Harbor. This was probably the most popular in Boston at the time. Boohee, this was a blend, said to be a little rougher for the working man and woman. Yeah, I mean, it's not too bad. I'd drink that. I think it would have tasted a lot better and been a lot better for you, thanks to the boiled water, than just drinking out of one of the public fountains in the city. Now, over here, if you wanted something a little bit more expensive for the discerning palate, you could have this, the Souchong classic black tea. Much smokier. Yeah. Much more taste to that. That would have been for the more discerning customers, as with this one over here, the young Hyson green tea. This would have been served in the finest salon in Boston. That's a nice cup of tea.
But whether they liked drinking tea or not, many people in Boston and beyond were incensed that it was taxed by the British government without any opportunity for them to have a say in the matter. But over in London, the rising tide of dissent in New England was not top of the list of Britain's imperial priorities. By late 1772, politicians struggling to hold the empire together were presented with a full-blown crisis. Not in Boston, but in Bengal. The East India Company had appallingly mismanaged a vast famine in their Indian heartland. It's estimated over 1 million Bengalis died.
The problem really with the mercantile corporation trying to run a government, their goal is profit, not actually the good of the people that they're trying to govern. So they're actually a terrible recipe for a government.
And on top of that, the company's London headquarters in Leadenhall was under huge financial pressure as it was saddled with massive debts owed to employees returning from service in India. In London, on October the 8th, 1772, the Prime Minister, Lord North, had a very unpleasant meeting. The chairman of the East India Company reported that the company was on the verge of bankruptcy.
There was someone else in London who knew how much trouble the East India Company was in, and he lived in this house here, just a stone's throw from Westminster, Benjamin Franklin.
Franklin was born in Boston. He was an extraordinary polymath, a scientist, writer, and political philosopher. He lived here as the colonial agent of the American colonies, a sort of unofficial ambassador.
Ben Franklin had friends in high places on both sides of the Atlantic, and he used his position to oil the cogs of diplomacy. People would rush into this house bringing information and gossip, and in turn he would send out letters with advice and ideas. And he knew all about the trouble at the East India Company.
From his rooms here on the first floor, Franklin sent the information he'd gathered over to the American colonies.
This is a wonderful letter that really shows just how connected Franklin was. It's written just a few weeks after Lord North, the Prime Minister, receives the terrible news that the East India Company is in big trouble. But in this letter, Franklin seems to know all the details. So he's obviously got informants feeding him all the juicy stuff, which he then in turn passes on to people in the Americas. In this case, Mr. Joseph Galloway, very senior politician there. He is the Speaker of the Pennsylvania Assembly. And he tells Galloway that the company have accepted bills which they find themselves unable to pay, though they have the value of $2 million in tea and other India goods in their stores. Unfortunately for them, they're perishing under want of demand.
Their credit thus suffering and their stock falling, government will lose £400,000 per annum. Can an American forbear smiling at these blunders? The company's problems are literally piling up in their warehouses and are in danger of destabilising British interests across the world.
I suppose they're also too big to fail. If the East India Company collapses, there are very real consequences in India. The French might move back into Bengal and take over. Britain and its empire would be seen to losing out.
Exactly, that's the kind of attitude that the British government had towards the East India Company, but also towards the American colonies, towards the colonies in the Caribbean, that any loss of power on their part could potentially lead to, or would rather lead to, gain on the part of the French or the Spanish or the Dutch.
The East India Company is sort of running Britain's empire in Asia on its behalf. It is essential for Britain's economy, it's essential for Britain's government finances, and I bet there's quite a few East India Company shareholders sitting in Parliament as well who are going to lose all their money.
Absolutely. I mean, there's almost 25% of the House of Commons and the House of Lords at this time have shares in the East India Company.
There's no chance the British government is going to let this company collapse.
Absolutely not, no.
One solution for the company was to ask the British government for a massive injection of cash.
They're asking for a loan of £1.5 million from the British government, which is a huge sum of money at the time. Bearing in mind the entire revenues of the British state at this period are about £8 million. And so this is a huge sum, something like, 15-20% of the state's revenues. The government can take matters into its own hands, give the East India Company the £1.5 million loan that they're asking for, but in exchange for that loan, they impose sweeping reforms on the East India Company.
But the company also needed the tea trade to be liberated, released from the taxes that made their tea too expensive, and upset the colonies.
In the early months of 1773, the East India Company asks Lord North's government to remove all of the duties on tea. Lord North's essentially offering the East India Company a rebate on the customs duties of importing the tea in the first place.
And the pitch to the British government is then, we need to pay back this enormous loan, remove this tax, and we'll just start selling tons of tea in North America. It's a big new market for us.
Exactly. It bails out the East India Company in a way, and it helps them out of the very short-term problem of not having enough cash to pay their immediate creditors, but also creates a potentially long-term market for their goods in tea.
So they've got loads of tea, and they just need to sell it to Americans who want to drink it.
The American market for tea is quite big. Benjamin Franklin says it's of £500,000, which he calculates would have been able to save the East India Company from their financial problems at the time.
The answer was the British government's Tea Act, aimed at boosting East India Company income by cutting out the need to use London middlemen and enabling imports direct to North America, albeit still with a small tax. It seemed a genius solution.
This is three-dimensional chess. So Lord North thinks he's solved the problem of the East India Company collapsing. He's solved the problem of raising revenue in North America, all in one beautiful piece of legislation.
I think so, but he feels like he's got a masterstroke here, solving two imperial problems with one piece of legislation. And it turns out it's too good to be true. And actually, he was warned about it at the time.
Oh, really?
Other MPs that are more closely attuned to the tea trade and the East India Company's affairs, and with American opinion, saying this is not good enough. The Americans aren't going to take the tea as long as it's got the duty on it. They'd maintained the tea duty alone as a kind of a token measure to prove that the British Parliament still had the sovereign right to tax the American colonies.
Do you think he could believe this would be the starting gun for American Revolution?
Absolutely not. Parliament debated the Tea Act in 1773 for one day.
Little did they realise that much more attention was being paid by Americans on both sides of the Atlantic to what was going on in London.
As the Tea Act is passing through the British Parliament, Benjamin Franklin is updating all his contacts in North America with exactly what's going on. He writes here at the beginning of June 1773 to Thomas Cushing, who was the Speaker of the Massachusetts Assembly, very important figure, bringing him up to speed on what's going on. And he says, "But now the wise scheme is to take off so much duty here as will make tea cheaper in America than foreigners can supply us, and continue the duty there to keep up the exercise of the right." So the British government are removing just enough of the tax to make sure that when that tea arrives in America, it'll be cheaper than the tea provided by smugglers. But they're leaving the duty on, the tea tax in America, just so they can reinforce that idea that the British government have the right to tax the American colonies. And Franklin gives the impression that the government here are sort of patting themselves on the back. They think they've scored a bit of a win. They have no idea that any people can act from any other principle but that of interest. And they believe that 3 pence in a pound of tea, of which one does not drink 10 in a year, is sufficient to overcome all the patriotism of an American. To me, it suggests that Franklin believed that the British handling of its North American colonies had by this point been reduced to a farce.
As the summer of 1773 turned to fall, consignments of East India Company tea began their journey across the Atlantic, bound for New York, Philadelphia, Charleston, and Boston.
The tension really ratcheted up in late November when a ship sailed here into Boston Harbour. It was the Dartmouth out from London, and in its hull was a cargo of East India Company tea. This is no longer hypothetical. The tea was arriving in the city. Government regulation stipulated that the merchant now had 20 days to unload the tea and pay the duty. After that point, the government would take matters into its own hands. It would confiscate the cargo and distribute it itself. So the people of Boston had a choice. Would they allow that tea to be landed? Would they allow the hated duty to be paid? The timer ran out on the 17th of December. The clock was ticking.
In the State House, Thomas Hutchinson was now governor of Massachusetts. He was determined the tea would be landed and the duty paid. One by one, the ships docked at Griffin's Wharf in Boston. The Dartmouth was joined by the Eleanor and the Beaver. Replicas of 2 of those ships are at the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum. Visiting them brings home the complexity of the situation, faced not just by British authorities, but by the local crews and ship owners too.
A really interesting thing that strikes me about coming on board this replica ship in Boston Harbour is the extent to which this was an American setup, made of New England pine, built here in America, crewed by Americans, owned by an American. They'd gone to London to pick up a cargo, as so many American ships had done before. Just over 100 chests of tea had been stored down there in the hold, and yet, because of that, when they sailed back into Boston Harbour, they found themselves at the very centre of a massive political storm. The community divided. Their decision now, the simple decision whether to keep the tea on board or unload it, would now define them for the rest of their lives. Would they be patriots or traitors, or both at the same time?
And as they waited to find out if they could unload the tea in their holds, debate in the city intensified. It began in Faneuil Hall, the commercial heart of the city, but outgrew that location and moved to the biggest place in town, the Old South Meeting Hall. Sandwiched between the two was the State House, the symbolic base of Governor Hutchinson, who was trying to enforce the duties imposed by Britain. Discussions intensified as decision day arrived, December the 16th, 1773.
So while that tea is sitting in the hull just down there, you can almost see it through the window, what do you think the mood was in this room?
So inside this room, it's not clear what is going to happen, but it's kind of clear we've lost control of something. The real power now has devolved to this town meeting and to these 5,000 people down the street who are going to decide what to do. And Hutchinson keeps hoping someone will, this is a lonely chair to sit in here because your nearest support is 3,000 miles away. You can call for troops, but that has ended very badly the last time that has happened. And Hutchinson is more and more isolated. And he sends the sheriff, Stephen Greenleaf, to one of these meetings to declare this is an illegal gathering. So the sheriff goes in, reads his thing, this is an illegal gathering, and 5,000 people hiss. I don't know if you've ever had 5,000 people hiss at you, but Greenleaf is a guy fairly easily intimidated, and that's enough. No, I'm not going to go try to break up another of these meetings.
Officials, merchants and ship owners moved between the governor, Hutchinson, and the gathering crowds of Bostonians here in the Old South Meeting House.
This was the largest enclosed space in Boston at the time, so it's not surprising that as the protests grew, the meetings ended up being held in here. And that December day, it said that thousands of people packed into the buildings or watched from the streets outside through the windows. And they listened to speeches, they voted in resolutions, they doubled down on their determination that that tea would not be landed and the hated tax would not be paid. There were a few voices of moderation, for example, Josiah Quincy, who warned that if the crowd took direct action, it would plunge this country into the most trying and terrible war it had yet seen. But they seemed to ignore that warning because, as well as the big public meetings, there were private, guarded conversations here. Plans were being laid for direct action that would make that conflict an inevitability.
To get a sense of the mood in this space that day, I'm meeting some of the experts who work here.
I think it would have been very tense. There are people on both sides of the faction. I remember hearing this great quote about tension crackling within the air in Boston, not just in the Old South Meeting House, but on the entire peninsula.
I think the colonists really need to figure out what they wanted to do. And I think, in my professional opinion, everybody's kind of all over the place and how they felt about the Tea Act, the provisions of the tea, the conflict around representation, and people really felt like they needed to be present and have their voices heard.
Set the scene in here on that December day.
5,000 people reportedly in this building, back to back, shoulder to shoulder, eagerly awaiting those to come up to the pulpit to give their opinions about the Tea Act and the tea being here in Boston.
All the options were aired, but it boils down to two. Either the tea has to leave town on the ships that brought it, or be destroyed.
People are warning that this is something that Bostonians can't turn back from if they do destroy property like this. Property destruction is a cardinal sin within the colonial community, so they really don't want it to come to that.
Isn't that interesting?
And there's some surprising evidence that property other than tea is highly respected.
It's an interesting story that also connects the Old South meeting house with the ships that brought the tea that ended up in Boston Harbor. It doesn't have anything to do with the huge public meeting here. Instead, it revolves around the person of an enslaved African woman. She was called Phyllis Wheatley. She'd have been allowed to sit up there with other people of color during the religious services. And she became the first published African-American author and poet. This is a copy of her book.
The first edition of this book was printed in London in 1773 and shipped to Boston.
By extraordinary coincidence, it arrived in Boston, carried in the same ship that was carrying all that notorious tea in 1773. Now, there was no tax on books, so the Patriots were perfectly happy for things like books to be offloaded and sold. It was the tea they had the problem with.
And Governor Hutchinson was adamant that the ships could not leave Boston with the tea still on board. British warships were ready to stop that. It was a total impasse. Eventually, a man associated with the Sons of Liberty since the 1760s drew the Old South meeting to a dramatic close.
Late that evening, Sam Adams climbed up into the pulpit and addressed the crowd. He drew the meeting to a close, announcing, "There is nothing more this meeting can do to save the country." The message was clear. The time for talking was over. It was time for action.
Hundreds of people reportedly poured out of the meeting house's south door and were joined by others as they headed down Milk Street towards Griffin's Wharf. Some disguised themselves as indigenous Americans. Today, actors daily recreate what happened next, albeit not under cover of darkness.
So over 50 men boarded each of the three ships. There was no struggle, no resistance. I think they looked pretty determined. The captain of this vessel was actually a Quaker. He was a pacifist. So he decided to stay in his cabin and let events take their course. Probably very sensible. When it came to throwing the tea overboard, the tea was wrapped in canvas, like a waterproof cover. Inside that, there were wooden chests of different sizes. Some chests they could just pour over the side. Some were really heavy. They had to manhandle them up, 2 or 3 blokes, break open the lid, and then use shoes or hats or hands to toss some of the tea leaves over before they could pick the rest of it up and dump them in the harbour. It was low tide, and so mounds of tea started appearing, sticking out of the water, just landing on the mud of the harbour floor. And so they sent boys over the side with rakes to make sure that every single tea leaf was thoroughly immersed in the water. The tea was destroyed by men and boys, but there were women present that day. There was perhaps 1,000 onlookers on the quayside. Many of them would have been daughters and wives of the Sons of Liberty. What part do you guys play?
I am Mercy Scalay. Miss Mercy Scalay. She is the daughter of town selectman John Scalay. from letters that I found on Mercy Scalay, is a very passionate patriot. She's very interested in politics and furthering Boston as a colony to become independent from England.
So she was probably here that night?
I think so. I think she was on the sidelines cheering on all her friends.
How about you guys? What are you? Let's start.
Sure. So I'm Mr. Joseph Pierce Palmer. He's a young, very spirited, very invested in the goings-on of the efforts to increase liberty within the colonies. So he would have been here this night, either up above decks working to destroy the chest of tea or a lookout on the wharf itself. And so he's here in Boston, really working a lot of various trades that come over from England, imported goods.
So you're doing a bit of smuggling?
He is a very honorable man who would probably smuggle as much as any other merchant.
John Bell is a historian of Revolutionary-era Boston.
This is Boston Harbor. We're on the waterfront. The waterfront is considerably closer to Britain than it was in 1773 because there's been a lot of landfill.
Well, you can see this. It's all built on over the water here, yeah. So somewhere over here was where the Tea Party took
Somewhere
place.
inland,
Okay.
at least 2 or 3 blocks inland,
Wow, that
was
far, yeah.
where Griffin's Wharf was, and that was where the 3 ships carrying East India Company tea were ordered to stay and not be unloaded until December 1773.
And this water would have been stained brown with the tea.
Yes.
And who's providing the muscle? Who are the enforcers? Who are going around enforcing the boycott, or indeed splitting open those chests and dumping tea in the sea?
Well, we remember names like Samuel Adams and John Hancock, but the man who was most involved in the actual physical action was probably the merchant William Molyneux. And we don't remember him at all because he died in October 1774 before the war, and he was never part of the Revolutionary War or the founding of the new government. He is the one leader among the very top Boston Whigs who was not in Old South Meeting House while the tea was actually being destroyed. The rest of them, Samuel Adams, John Hancock, Dr. Joseph Warren, Dr. Thomas Young, and so on, they were all sitting in Old South Meeting House in view of hundreds of people when the crime was taking place. William Molyneux was not there.
So they've got an alibi.
Exactly. And the people who were carrying it out were more likely from the working class, the craftsmen, waterfront workers themselves, blacksmiths, because there were very big chests of tea, hundreds of pounds of tea that had to be hauled up from the ship's cargo, chopped open, and then dumped overboard.
And who are these radicals? It's one of the most celebrated events in American history. Do we know exactly what went down and who was there?
Well, it was one of the most celebrated events. It was also a criminal act, and you don't write down things about the criminal conspiracy. There was a list of men kept by the printer Benjamin Eads. They signed themselves to secrecy, and then in subsequent years, that list was destroyed.
It sounds like it was efficient, it was quiet, it was very deliberate.
It was an extremely controlled event because they wanted to make very clear that they only wanted to destroy the tea. There was a lock on one of the ships that had to be broken in order to get to the cargo, and the next day, somebody went and gave that ship's captain a lock to replace the broken one. And then they put that in the newspaper to make it clear to the world that no property except the East India Company tea had been destroyed.
News of the destruction of the tea in Boston reached London in January 1774. The reaction was one of near universal horror. Lord North declared, "The Americans have tarred and feathered your subjects, burnt your ships, denied obedience to your laws and authority. Yet so clement and so forbearing has our conduct been, that it is incumbent on us now to take a different course. It goes to all. We must control them or submit to them." The port of Boston was shut down, and a host of oppressive measures, known as the Intolerable Acts, were applied as punishment and to restore British authority. They succeeded in achieving the very opposite.
Benjamin Franklin travelled back to America in 1775 as relations grew ever worse. And there's a fascinating unsent letter which he dashed off to a former friend, colleague, ally, William Strahan, that I think articulates the very real pain that people were feeling at this time of growing separation. He writes, "You are a member of Parliament and one of that majority which has doomed my country to destruction. You have begun to burn our towns and murder our people. Look upon your hands, they are stained with the blood of your relations. You and I were long friends. You are now my enemy, and I am yours. Be friendly."
Less than a year after, the Declaration of Independence was adopted by the Second Continental Congress, meeting in Philadelphia. Its first public reading in Massachusetts was made, without a hint of irony of course, from the balcony of the old State House.
We always like to say Bostonians did the legwork and Philadelphians did the paperwork. So I think there's kind of this pride about us starting the American Revolution.
In the early hours of the 19th of April 1775, a unit of 700 redcoats was marching along this road through the British colony of Massachusetts Bay in North America. They'd been told that this expedition would be a relatively straightforward one. They were to recover some stolen armaments from a group of troublemakers in a town called Concord. Actually, what lay ahead was a day of destruction and bloodshed, one that would transform the trajectory of world history.
I'm walking in the hard-fought footsteps of the dramatic events of that day, along a battlefield that stretched 16 miles from Concord to Boston.
His immediate thought is, I need to get out of here.
Exploring key sites.
This is a choke point here.
It is, it's the fatal funnel.
Discovering the latest archaeological finds that are reassessing the battle.
When you pull that musket ball out of the ground, it gives you chills because last time human hands have touched that, they were ramming it down the barrel.
Well, a lot of lead flies through the air that day.
A lot of lead.
And investigating the battle damage that can still be found.
Just shows nowhere safe.
Including new experiments revealing exactly what happened. Shots heard round the world along a road that would eventually lead to American independence. In the small hours of April 19th, that British column was marching along the Bay Road. They had left Boston before midnight, crossing the Charles River under cover of darkness and starting to head towards their objective that lay 16 miles northwest in Concord. But provincial militia were gathering, including in the towns that lay along the way.
As the sun rose on the 19th of April, the leading units of that British column arrived here at the town of Lexington. They marched onto the common here, and they saw, just over there, lined up in formation, armed, the town's militia, waiting for them. No one knew what was going to happen next.
To help me explore the events of that day in detail is Jonathan Bratton from the US Army's Center for Military History.
Jonathan, good to see you again, man.
Great to see you.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, it's great to be
So
here.
you've got the road from Boston there,
Yep,
and
we
then Concord that way?
Is that way, yep. So
Okay.
that's the Concord Road, the Bedford Road. And so really, if you're the British, you want to just come right through and head right towards your objective. Lexington really has nothing to do with the overall plan, right? You know, it's a town that's on the way.
The British had hoped their advance could be kept secret, but a group of riders, including Paul Revere, had warned militia leaders. Now the countryside was alive with noise, shots, shouts, and bells as the warning was passed ahead.
So the British actually halt outside the town and load with ball prior to marching in to Lexington.
So they've heard rumours that there's something brewing in this town.
Something could possibly be going on.
As the British come in here, they see these provincial militias. Sometimes just having a lot of armed men in a very small space things can go wrong.
Exactly, especially if you've been marching all night. The countryside is alight with fires. You can hear musket shots, signal shots off in the distance,
So the
bells
redcoats
ringing.
are scared.
And then you come marching into town, and you see in front of you, right here, you've got about 75, 76 men in line there. And you always need that commanding officer to be keeping things in control. And that commanding officer is Major John Pitcairn.
Back in 1775, Lexington's Green had a meeting house on it. Pitcairn passed behind it, and at this crucial moment was separated from his troops.
In that break, that just, 30 seconds to a minute break, Pitcairn comes around and he sees that his first two companies are on line here, and they're facing off. There's a lot of tempers that are just hair thin. Somebody fires a shot. Captain John Parker of the militia gives the order to disperse, and then all of a sudden the redcoats fire. And so all of a sudden, where you had a tense moment, now you have 8 dead and dying militia on the ground. There's a brief return fire. Pitcairn's horse is wounded, one soldier is wounded. They're on their homes. Jonathan Harrington will drag himself to his house right there and die on the steps of his own home. It takes about half an hour to regain sort of control of the British troops and get them back on the road to Concord, and then they march off after about half an hour, leaving behind this absolute chaotic mess.
It's not war yet, but it feels like we're teetering on the edge.
How did we get to this precipice? Opposition to the British government had fermented in the city of Boston, culminating in the Tea Party of December 1773. But in 1774, it spread out into the whole Massachusetts Bay Colony, thanks to punitive British legislation. To understand this context, I've come to the Colonial Society of Massachusetts to meet Professor Bob Allison.
The Massachusetts Government Act is really the one that puts towns in Massachusetts which had not been on board with Boston's radicalism on the same side, because now they can't have a town meeting. So this takes away the power of self-government, not just from the radical Bostonians, but from the very moderate or conservative people in Concord or Mendon or other towns in Massachusetts who now have lost their power to govern themselves.
These actions by the government in distant London put the Massachusetts governor, General Sir Thomas Gage, in an increasingly impossible position.
The governor calls for the assembly to meet in October of 1774 in Salem. Then he realizes this won't be a good idea. So he suspends it, but the members of the assembly say they never got that message, they were suspended. So they show up, but then the governor doesn't show up. So they say, the governor didn't come to the assembly, so we'll declare the office of governor vacant. We'll keep meeting. And they meet as the provincial Congress. And they say, okay, don't send your taxes to the treasurer appointed by General Gage, who's now the governor, but to the treasurer appointed by us. Money is really the essential thing here. But the provincial Congress essentially becomes the de facto government, while General Gage, first in Salem and then in Boston, has the commission from the Crown to be the governor of Massachusetts. So you have two governments operating, one with the official imprimatur of the Crown, and then the other winning the support of the people of Massachusetts. So this is really what's happening in 1774, 1775. And the towns begin preparing militia companies. Every town has a militia. Every man between 16 and 60 serves in it. But now the towns form minute companies. These are younger men, do more training, and they're supposed to be prepared at a minute's notice. And the towns also start stockpiling gunpowder and ammunition in case of an emergency to protect them from what they call the ministerial troops, that is, the troops sent here by the British ministry.
And worse still, munitions, including artillery pieces, were being stolen by the militia, placing British control of Boston in peril.
This is one of the cannon that was the source of so much British anxiety. It had been stored in an arsenal in the city of Boston. It was a British cannon, bronze, fired a 3-pound projectile, about the size of a baseball. But it had been stolen. It had been smuggled out of the city by the provincials, by the rebels. They'd hidden it in a cart full of night soil, and now it had been hidden in the countryside deeper into the colony. Now, it was just completely unacceptable for the British that the rebels, the provincials, had access to firepower like this. They had to do something about it.
All this rising tension led to the British troops heading out from Boston on the road to Concord on April the 19th, 1775. After the short firefight at Lexington, they marched on into Concord, flags flying, drums beating. They met no resistance. The local militia had withdrawn to the north of the town. The British commander, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, set up his headquarters on this cemetery hill overlooking the town and put his troops to work. British regulars started to search the town for military supplies. They'd been tipped off by loyalist spies on likely locations. The governor had issued strict instructions that the soldiers do not plunder the inhabitants or hurt private property. But many of the armaments had been rehidden and could not be found. To secure the entrance to the town and search for more rebel weapons beyond, British troops were ordered to Concord's North Bridge. I've come with Jonathan to this famous spot that is synonymous with the start of the fighting.
This is important because this is one of the main routes in and out of town. You've got to secure it.
It is, yeah, and especially if you've got troops that have been sent across to go search.
So the Brits, because there's farmsteads, the Brits need to go and search for gunpowder and weapons and things. Okay, so here we go, we're crossing the bridge now.
We're crossing the bridge. We are reenacting the movement of the light companies that come across here and find themselves in this sort of wide open area with this formidable height overlooking you.
But this is a choke point here.
It is. It's the fatal funnel, so to speak, of what do you do with only one entry and egress route.
3 companies of regulars carried on moving to look for militia cannon. The rest stayed behind, guarding the approach to the bridge.
So how many British troops are here on this spot?
You've got around 95 to 100 in 3 companies.
But facing them, mustering on the high ground, were a growing number of militia.
You've got hundreds of soldiers coming and congregating at this point. And there's a big problem down here at the bridge because the 3 light companies that are left here have no overall commander. So you've got 3 captains who are sort of arguing with each other. What do we do? What should we be on that side? Should we be on this side? Should we move closer? By 9:30 and 10, there's 500 troops at the top of this hill.
So when they first get here, 7:30 in the morning?
There's just a few bubbas.
Yeah.
A few farmers.
So you're fine with that?
Yeah, it's great. And then there's the whole question of, does it matter? No, we're not at war. Yeah, there was some shooting this morning, but they're just, they're farmers, right? They're rabble. The problem is the rabble keep becoming more and more, and they start looking really organized. By mid-morning, you've got 500 troops that are very visible.
To see the other side of the confrontation, we're heading up to the high ground where the militia were gathering under the command of Colonel Barrett, looking down on the British, standing between them and the North Bridge.
So these are men who are from Concord, they live around Concord, and they're nervous about what's going on in the town.
Right, because they had to leave. Barrett makes the very conscious decision of, we're not going to contest, we're not going to try to fight. They're still trying to gather information and gather troops. Remember, they only have about 100, 150 to begin with. So they come all the way back out, they come up on Punkatasset Hill. Barrett's got a bunch of things to think about, like the cannons that are buried in his yard, so he runs to go take care of them. When he comes back at around 10 a.m., you've got about 500 troops that are ready to do something. And everyone's debating, what do we do? What do we do? What happened? What happened at Lexington? We don't really know. The information is mostly rumor at this point. Many people were killed. Everyone's massacred. They're burning the town. All the rumors are flying around.
So they could be nervous that there's civilians there, women, children.
They're families. Yeah. They're families.
And the Redcoats might be running amok in
Yes.
Things looked ominous in the distance. As the British destroyed the military supplies they'd been able to find, fires had been started. Some British troops tried to help extinguish them, but from afar, it looked bad.
Smoke begins to rise, and that's what you see. If you're standing up there, you're seeing smoke rising from the town.
That's their homes.
And those could be their homes that are on fire. The younger militiamen who have been sort of itching to get a fight going. Lieutenant Hosmer, the regimental adjutant, turns to the regimental commander and says, "I've heard it said that the British think that they can travel through the countryside unmolested, and now I believe it. Will you let them burn the town?" And now Colonel Barrett has to do something. Colonel Barrett gives the orders to Major Buttrick to form his minute battalion, about 250 soldiers, and they march in military column down the hill with Colonel Barrett saying to every man as they passed, "Don't fire first, don't fire first, don't fire first."
Every step is now bringing them closer and closer to confrontation.
Colonel Barrett's provincial militia, by now numbering over 400 men, moved in notably good military order down the hill towards the British by the bridge. The dam had to break.
So the provincials, they're getting right up in the faces of these redcoats.
Yes.
This is quite a moment. The tension building here.
It is. You've got a column of a military column marching down with intent. And so you as the British, what do you do at this point?
So I'm going to withdraw.
Yes. You're going to withdraw back across the bridge.
This is not how the script was supposed to go. These redcoats they're retreating.
They're falling back. They're creating space between this growing group of Americans who are moving up with militancy and organization. There's all this huge explosion of tension, and at this point, as a British officer says, several of my men gave fire.
So the British opened fire. What about this range?
At about this range, this is your deadly zone for infantry combat of this era, where that smoothbore musket is most effective. From the bridge and from on either side of the bridge comes this first scattered volley and kills several Americans, including Captain Isaac Davis, the lead man on the column. Major Buttrick calls out, "Fire, for God's sakes, fire!" And this whole initial column erupts in this ragged fire. Men are peeling out to either side to try to get a better shot, going into almost battle lines. Some are moving up on the bridge and pouring this very accurate fire into these three British companies. We're in a shooting war, and the cost is becoming immediate as officers and NCOs are going down. This is the proverbial shot heard round the world. It's because this is that first deliberate moment when colonists open fire with intent to kill on His Majesty's troops.
So the redcoats are retreating. They can't take the heat from these men who previously despised as disorganized farmers. It's the world turned upside down.
The firefight was over in an instant. The regular companies broke and fled, leaving 3 of their men dead and dying. Colonel Smith and Major Pitcairn on Cemetery Hill in the centre of Concord had already observed the surrounding countryside alive with hundreds of incoming militiamen. Now, they heard the firing from the North Bridge.
So I'm just trying to imagine Smith and Pitcairn up here. They've set out on what they were told would be a march through the countryside to just secure some warlike provisions, hopefully not facing any opposition or anything. There's a shooting war going on now.
Yeah.
And they're up here and they are seeing the landscape swarming with enemy.
His immediate thought is, I need to get out of here.
Where's the road to Boston?
Right here. This is the road to Boston, goes this way. In your first duty as a commander, you have to evacuate your casualties. So the way he does that is he's going around the town. He's finding carts to basically place his wounded in. He just walked into essentially a division formation with 700 guys and just kicks it, and then expects nothing to happen.
You've enraged the local population. You're heading back to Boston, and everyone knows the route you're going to take.
There's really only one.
In just a couple of hours, everything had totally changed.
When they come into Concord, they're marching in almost parade formation, colors flying, drums beating, fifes playing music. And it's very much a visible presence patrol, so to speak. When they leave, you've got the grenadiers on the road, and then on either flank, and especially up here, you have your light infantry screening your flanks, which means that you are expecting contact.
They arrived in peacetime, they left in wartime.
So, the 700 British light infantrymen, grenadiers and marines started their return to Boston, 16 miles away along the Bay Road. At first, they didn't encounter any opposition, but that changed just a mile outside Concord as militia from Reading fired on the British at Merriam's Corner. The running battle back to Boston had begun. This engraving, created shortly after the battle, shows how this looked. The column of grenadiers ploughing ahead down the Bay Road, supported by light infantry fanning out into the countryside, protecting their flanks. Militia finding cover behind stone walls and trees, getting shots off at the redcoats. I've come to the Hartwell Tavern. It stood here on the Bay Road in 1775. Inside, I'm meeting two expert reenactors representing the provincial militia and the British Light Infantry, Jared Fwoss and Niels Hobbs. Superficially, you look quite different, but actually, look closely, a lot of this kit is in common, isn't it? Can you talk me through what everyone would have had?
So I am portraying a typical militia soldier here in New England in 1775, sometimes referred to as Minutemen, a specialized type of militia soldier, but what I am is what's called armed as according to law. So what you see I have on me is my normal set of clothes. That's gonna be the big difference. We don't have uniforms, so this is what I would be wearing out every day. Some of these soldiers are gonna put on their Sunday best when they go out for the fight on April 19th. We have accounts of men who are powdering their hair before they go out into the fight. But otherwise, all the other equipment that I have is your standard military gear. Now, this I'm wearing is a sword, a hunting sword. We were required by law to have a bladed sidearm. So typically you're gonna see swords, small swords oftentimes for officers. And if you were in a particularly dire straits financially, you might have a hatchet, but that is not going to go over so well in close quarters combat. Otherwise, I would also be looking for a bayonet if I could get one.
And then musket here.
Yes.
Firearm.
Yes, so this is what's called a fowling piece. This is the typical weapon that is going to be carried by militia soldiers here on April 19th. These are civilian sporting weapons, so this is meant for hunting fowl. As a civilian militia soldier, I was required to bring my own firelock, required to be 3.5 feet in length at least, and with 20 musket balls fitted to my specific gun. You have a wide variety of different calibers of shot.
So you've got to bring your own shot.
Yes. So you could have had a shot pouch and a powder horn, which would have been literally a horn filled with gunpowder, and in a small leather pouch you would have put loose musket balls into. Or I would have had my military style cartridge box. So this is a pre-rolled cartridge with a pre-measured charge of gunpowder and a paper tube with a musket ball in it, and it speeds up your loading time in an incredible rate.
I'm actually dressed as a British officer in a light infantry company, which is a special elite type of unit, type of force within the British Army. As an officer, at this point in the war, I would have also carried a very similar firelock, a very similar weapon to this, a fowling piece. Typical British soldier, something a little bit more rugged, what we now call the brown vest musket, essentially something very similar to this. Also, I have a sidearm, similarly a sword. A more typical British soldier would carry a bayonet to fix and essentially turn their musket into a spear. I have a whistle for communication on the field, something that especially as the light infantry are more dispersed in the field, anything that can kind of carry sound over to be able to allow troops to stay in cohesive contact is important. But then also very basic things that denote me as an officer. This thing here called a gorget, a vestige of medieval times armor for sort of higher class nobles. Underneath my belly box, I have also an officer's sash, this silk sash here, which denotes rank as well. So there's a lot that sort of shows essentially your status within the Army, and effectively your status within society. The force that leaves Boston was not really planning on being gone from Boston for any length of time. So they went with just what was the most effective gear to get them to point A and then back home quickly as possible. A little bit different for the militia.
Yes, so what you're seeing, like I said, is armed as according to law. So not only is it my weapons, my accoutrement to fight in conflict, but also to sustain myself while on campaign. So I have a knapsack here that has a blanket roll on top of it, and I would have had a change of clothes in there. By law, I was required to have all these things along with 3 days worth of provisions. And again, that was because the expectation was if I was called out for an alarm, I wouldn't necessarily be going home at the end of that night. I could be gone for days, weeks, and many of the soldiers who formed up on April 19th to fight the regulars coming out towards Concord, they go off for months after this engagement. They don't get to return home.
Primary tactical job of light infantry, the doctrine from the 18th century, is to provide screening action to keep the enemy further away. Here at Battle Road on April 19th, that role was even more crucial. While the main column is going down the Bay Road, that column is being subjected to shooting from all around. It was really only the light infantry that had the training, the doctrine, to break free and clear and act as a protective shield around the main army. The casualties, as staggering as they were on that day for the British Army, would have been vastly worse. And it's very possible cohesion would have completely been lost if it hadn't been for the light infantry pushing the rebel militia out further. The straight distance from Cambridge Common in Boston to Concord Bridge is about 32 miles both ways, so 16 miles each way. British light infantry were running even more than that, and also just completely exerting themselves. There's talk about, the preparations before the shooting actually started of the British light infantry practicing on Boston Common, laying down prone, jumping back up, hiding behind trees, etc. That was a central part of their training. Conversely, the Americans, even though they were used to hunting out in the field, they were getting trained the other way, to act like traditional soldiers.
So you're getting trained to be more frontiersmen.
Yep.
And you guys are getting trained to be more like regular redcoats.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep, that's exactly right. And on April 19th, the militia are going to learn that lesson the hard way, especially in areas like Hartwell Tavern, where they're getting caught between the British column in the road and the light infantry flankers that are out in the fields. And that's where casualties are occurring.
By now, the British certainly knew that they were in a running battle, as militia from surrounding towns and villages poured towards the Bay Road. At around 1 p.m., the British crossed a stream known as the Elm Brook. A detailed archaeological survey was carried out around Elm Brook in the summer of 2024. They used metal detectors and carefully mapped the finds. 70 musket balls were unearthed. The results, plotted on this heat map of the battle, are only just being revealed. I'm meeting two people who worked on the project, National Parks archaeologist Joel Jukes and Jared Fwassagan, who has swapped his militia gear for his usual park ranger uniform.
And Joel, is this where you've been doing your research?
Yes, we laid out a grid across the entire landscape out here and focused a metal detection survey on the area. Spent a lot of time in here. This landscape around here had at least 50 musket balls. After ballistic analysis, it showed that they're all provincial, so they were all fired towards the British column that was coming up the road right here.
So the road is roughly where the modern road is there?
So looking out here, you can see the roads here in our modern time period, and that is actually the road that would have been there in 1775. And as it crests the top of Elmbrook Hill in that time period, it would have actually sharply bent to the north, and that's how we get the south bend in Elmbrook Hill.
It was a bit of a choke point for the British column coming through here.
And you got a lot of musket balls here, so have they fallen short of the road?
The metal detector survey revealed where fired musket balls landed. The heat map shows where the greatest concentrations of musket balls were discovered. Where we are standing was a hotspot for finds.
One of the most incredible things about doing this archaeology is that when you pull that musket ball out of the ground, it gives you chills, because really the last time human hands have touched that, they were ramming it down the barrel of their gun 250 years ago.
The heat map reveals a large number of musket balls fired by provincial militia landing right here, to the east of the Elm Brook, where the road bent north in what was relatively open ground in 1775. It enables the team to interpret what happened in the firefight here.
The column would have been moving on the road, but there would have been flanking troops moving along the side, so they would have been exposed here on the slope, and the provincials coming up behind them would have had an easy shot at them from the other side.
So these are balls being shot from behind?
Yes, they're hitting the rear guard of the column.
Okay. And how much can you tell from musket ball? You can tell it's been fired. Can you tell whether it's hit something or?
Yeah, there's a whole deformation index that we developed with our partners, and you could tell a ball that's traveled a long distance and maybe lost velocity and hit the ground, or one that's smacked into something that was fired close by.
It appears that here the provincials were moving in on the British rearguard, which was trying to protect the back of the retreating column.
We've gone back and looked at the casualties for the British column, and the ones that were in the rear, the companies in the rear holding that off, took the heaviest casualties that day.
I'll bet. So the main column is marching up through there. These people are just trying to keep back the provincials because there's a swarm of provincials following this column.
So we estimate in this section of the fighting, there's about 1,200 militia soldiers who are actually engaged in the battle here, but there are thousands in the landscape all around us moving in. They're marching from their various towns, from Woburn, from Lexington area, from Sudbury, from Concord. So these roads are just gonna feed those militia soldiers in on top of the column as they're headed back to Boston.
Very intimidating for that British rearguard here. You're trying to retreat, but you're seeing just more and more and more reinforcements arriving on your enemy's side.
We found out here with our archaeology is that there was a very intense firefight that took place at this spot.
The archaeology here really reinforces the sense you get from reading the sources that were written down at the time. That whatever had happened earlier in the day, by this stage, the British Army has found itself in the midst of a brutal running battle.
The Elm Brook survey discovered an extraordinary array of musket balls fired on April the 19th, 1775. National Parks curator Nikki Walsh has been assessing them.
So what are we looking at here?
Here we have some musket balls that were discovered from Elm Brook Hill this past summer in 2024. This is an area that was not previously studied by the park. We knew that it had a high sensitivity for archaeological resources, and we were able to complete the project and found almost 70 musket balls.
So these have been on the battlefield for 249 years.
249 years.
Just discovered.
And just discovered. There's no better feeling than being the person that finds it, picks it up, and says, we got another one.
That's so great. And how do you know if they're British or provincial?
We go based on caliper size. So this little one right here, this is a provincial ball. And one of the ways that we know it's provincial is because they really ranged in size. They weren't standard weapons, as the British would have had. They weren't standard issue, so they had different barrel sizes.
So this small one here, so caliber is the diameter of the ball, allowing it to fit down the barrel. This is what caliber is this?
So this one is a little bit on the smaller side, probably close to about 40 cal, and was a fired provincial ball that just kind of landed, didn't hit anything, and retained its shape.
Because it's got its spherical shapes.
Right, when you think of a musket ball, you think of this.
That's it. Okay, there's something has happened to this one.
Yeah, so this is a British fired, so it's closer to that 69 cal. And you can see here, it's kind of flat, it's sheared. The British had a more standard size musket ball because they had standard size guns, as opposed to the provincials who just had to have a weapon and they had to have munitions for that weapon. So the British had a pretty standard 69 caliber.
Okay.
So if we find this, we can say it's likely British.
And what on earth's going on with this one here?
That is a great example of what happens when a musket ball hits a tree. And so you can actually see a pattern in here of bark.
This one has had a catastrophe.
Well, this one doesn't really look like a musket ball at all, but it is. And what happened to it, since the lead is so malleable, it hit a rock in this case, and it actually morphed. Yeah, it's splayed, and you can see the underside here.
And then finally, this is a bigger ball here.
This is, so like, If you compare the two sizes here, obviously a big difference. This is provincial because it's about 80 cal. When this came out of the ground, everyone was astonished at how big it is. And I wouldn't want to get hit with either of those, but I really wouldn't want to get hit with that 80.
But it also means that you can't share musket balls with your buddy next door because you might have completely different weapons.
Exactly. So it was very individualized for the provincials up until later in the war when they were able to standardize things a little bit more.
But it shows that there was a lot of lead flying through the air that day.
A lot of lead. At this excavation this past summer, we found about 70 musket balls. So that was the biggest discovery at the park thus far. So we've learned a great deal about where everybody was placed during the battle, how much lead was flying, and what it was hitting.
And the lead kept flying as more militia moved in and the British battled on, moving as quickly as possible back towards Boston. Walking the same route through Minuteman National Historical Park today is a thought-provoking experience.
Walking along Battle Road, I'm just imagining that I'm in the vanguard of that beleaguered column of British troops. I'm up here, the back is about 300 metres, 350 yards back. I can hear the constant rolling sound of musketry, the pops coming from the rear guard that are dealing with the provincials that are chasing and waiting like hyenas to pounce on any wounded or stragglers. Up here, I'm scanning the woods, I'm scanning the landscape that I'm passing through, sometimes open, sometimes walled, sometimes heavily wooded. I'm constantly looking out for any sign of the now hated provincials lying in ambush, waiting for me to come. Perhaps the sun flashing off the burnished steel, or the polished wooden stocks of their muskets. They'd be hiding behind these walls, these trees, these rocks. It's actually got a broken landscape. There's lots of little undulations, plenty of places to bring down fire upon the people on this road. Remember, I'm like a fish in a barrel. The provincials know the Brits have to stick to this road. A big column of infantry marching along. I have not slept for well over 24 hours. I'm sure I finished my canteen of water a long time ago. It's very hot. I'm footsore. I'm well into my second marathon by now. Food is a distant memory. My feet are agony. This is a physical challenge apart from anything else. And I've seen my friends shot down. I've seen my comrades suffer hideous wounds. Boston feels like a long way away. Officers have been killed. Unit cohesion is fracturing. I'm not sure who's in charge, and I'm not sure I've any longer got confidence in that leadership. I imagine the temptation is to just break away, every man for himself, and try and sprint, make it back anyhow to Boston and safety. But actually that's a very dangerous temptation, because although you might feel vulnerable in this column, at least there is a strength in these numbers. In ones and twos, we'd just be hunted down in this countryside like vermin. This stretch of Battle Road really gives you a sense of just how bad things had got for the British by the time they got here, just short of Lexington at mid-afternoon. Because we know that at this point, the British were simply abandoning their wounded, just leaving them on the side of the road. They weren't trying to treat them, certainly, and they weren't even trying to haul them back to Boston. And if a military unit is doing that, I think it reflects the fact that they're in the very limits of their endurance. We know it because one soldier was actually dragged up, taken into the Smith house there by the family that lived there. They treated him and he lingered for 3 or 4 days before dying, but he was alone. No one could or would come back for him.
Just a couple of miles ahead lay Lexington, where the firing had started back at the far distant dawn of the same day. But the militia of Lexington, under their captain John Parker, who had lost 8 men killed in the early morning volleys, had regrouped and were lying in wait in the countryside, determined to take their revenge on the retreating British regulars. The historic site, known as Parker's Revenge, has also been the location of some remarkable archaeology. A complete survey of the area was carried out. including a geophysical survey to establish the lie of the land 250 years ago. Metal detectorists found a wealth of artifacts, including buttons and many musket balls, both whole and smashed on impact. Mapping the balls enabled a rethink of where and how this famous moment in the battle played out on April the 19th. I'm meeting two members of the team, lead archaeologist Meg Wilkes and park ranger Jim Hollister.
Well, they're exhausted. They've been up all night. They've marched many miles. They're running low on ammunition. Some of their officers are down, but coming back to this location just over the border from the town of Lincoln into Lexington, the Lexington militia have rallied, and they've chosen a very strong position, and they're going to take revenge for what happened to them that morning.
So, Meg, you've done the archaeology at this site. I guess, first of all, what we're seeing, how similar would it have been 250 years ago?
What we've done through background research and reconstructing that historic landscape, we know that there was a woodlot in this location, and it actually would have looked a lot like we're seeing right now.
That's so exciting. So we really get a sense of what it was like for the redcoats here. But what's missing is the provincials. Where would they have been in this landscape?
Well, that's where the archaeology comes in. When we did our investigation here, we used metal detecting to try to identify evidence. Each individual musket ball is telling us a story of what went on here. And at the end of the project, we were able to interpret what we believe actually happened here.
This heat map shows where the main clusters of fired musket balls were found here at Parker's Revenge, fired by the British and the provincial militia.
Can you go and show me where you found those musket balls?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I think what we'll do is we'll start with the Lexington fired musket balls.
Okay.
So initially, though, the Lexington militia are concealed up on this hillside, and they are waiting as the vanguard of the British regular column deploys, and this is basically the alignment right along here where the British vanguard was deploying, and that the Lexington militia, who would have been up in the woods here, would have fired pretty much all at once on that line of men deploying.
Now, every time I've done musket balls on battlefields, I've always been confused because infantry have a habit of dropping their own musket balls as well as receiving the fire of So you're sure the ones here were fired at the British?
Yes, once the musket balls were found, then we had to do an analysis of the musket balls, putting them under a microscope. And, some of them, it's obviously been fired. They're very heavily deformed. But some of them, they're more subtle clues, little dimples in the lead where the powder went off.
So that's great. So these musket balls were definitely fired at the Brits.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, right. Where are the British musket balls?
Right, well, the British musket balls are up on this hill, and there's one that was dropped. So we know the position of at least one
that's
of
handy.
the Lexington militia.
Okay, I'm going to head up. Will you tell me when to stop?
Head on up.
Okay.
You want to go halfway up that slope there.
Okay. I'm seeing some good cover here, these big boulders.
Yep, they would have used them.
Some trees, ideal place, really.
Almost there. Not so far away. Just about there.
That's about it there?
Yeah, right there.
Okay, interesting.
Yep, that's where they would have fired the Lexington militia down on the vanguard.
Standing here is such a reminder of the intimacy, really, of 18th century warfare. These two sides firing musket volleys at each other, but you can see your opposition. You can see your opponent's facial expressions.
The concentration of provincial musket balls, mostly discovered in one area, suggests that John Parker's Lexington militia fired once at the British vanguard before the British started to return fire.
Redcoats are coming off the road. The provincials are firing a big volley here, and then it's time to withdraw.
Yeah, and you want to go fast. There you go, keep going. Up over the hill.
Well, thank you for putting me through my paces. So how's your archaeology changed what people think happened here?
Oh, well, it's been so interesting because, archaeology is based in science, and we use systematic survey to actually identify evidence that would help prove the questions that we had actually posed at the beginning of our project. And one of them was, where was the battle? Initially, it was thought that the Lexington militia were on the granite outcrop over there, but it's actually not a great place because there, on the other side of it is a sheer drop-off, so there's literally no escape.
It's a death trap.
Based on the evidence and the musket balls that we identified and recovered, it was actually right along this ridge edge and down the hill.
The survey didn't discover any musket balls around the traditional granite outcrop site of Parker's Revenge. Instead, the British shots all landed along the ridge, chasing the provincials after they fired and made their escape.
But also it seems that you've learned something about the nature of the fighting itself.
The evidence that Meg and her team uncovered was tactical thinking. When we thought that the fight was on that rocky outcrop, they're dangerously exposed. Remember what happened to Lexington in the morning? They're out there in the town common, they get shot to pieces. But they come out here and they choose a different position. And this ridge checks all the boxes. They can't be outflanked by the British light infantry. They have a good way of escaping. What they're doing is from here, they can fire, and they can retreat, hit them again down the road, and live to fight another day.
So the archaeology points to Parker's Revenge being a short encounter here in these woods. A volley from the militia, and then return fire from the British spread across the hillside as the provincials rapidly retreated. And the fighting continued. The British weren't even halfway to Boston.
Jonathan, being in this landscape really reinforces to me that these soldiers are in hell.
Yes, this is, you've heard of the Mogadishu Mile from Black Hawk down. This is the Boston 16 Mile. Now, all of a sudden, you're engaged in this real circle of fire as more and more militia units are converging along this road at choke points and anywhere that they can have a possible advantage on this British column.
And so demoralizing because you can't, it's behind you. So you think, well, let's get away from it. But you can actually see there are militia units moving to intercept you up ahead as well.
Right, and so there's no way, the only way out is through, essentially. This is the problem of the ambush. And every military has essentially the same rules for it, is like, if you stay, you die. You must fight through it. Only got 36 rounds per man. 36 rounds per man is not going to take you all the way back to Boston. So you've got officers who are probably doing these mental calculations of how far can we actually take this? How far can we fight? At what point are we going to stop being attacked? If we are attacked like this at every corner, we're not going to make it back to Boston.
But just as the British regulars looked as if they were totally broken, they finally received relief. 1,000 British reinforcements under the command of Lord Percy arrived in Lexington with artillery in support. Finally, some order was restored as they staggered back into the town where earlier they had caused mayhem. But rumors were swirling through the British ranks, even tales of injured regulars being scalped by the militia. Coupled with the relentless fighting, there was a growing fury. As British discipline wavered, it gave way to looting and savagery. As the afternoon wore on, the regulars reached the scattered village of Monotony. Ahead of them, militiamen had filled the yards and houses, ready to ambush. This was the home of a local man called Jason Russell. He'd sent his family away, but remained himself, as the house and the surrounding land were filled with provincial troops. Remarkable work has been carried out to analyse the damage caused to the building. I'm meeting up with two researchers at a local firing range, battlefield archaeologist Doug Scott and military historian Joel Bowie.
So what have we got here? This is the chunky one. This is the British one, is it?
British pattern 1756 Longland musket, which we'll use for you to fire to show you what the British musket was like.
Also known as the old Brown Bess.
Yep. Yeah, that's the workhorse of the British Army.
It's a heavy one, this one, isn't it? It feels chunky. Give this to a teenager and he might not break it straight away.
It's built for a soldier.
Okay, and what's this one? This is looking a little bit more dainty over here.
Yeah, so we've got a New England fowling piece here, and this is what would have been used by people hunting. A lot lighter, a lot thinner, not necessarily made for military use. That one has a much longer barrel, and there's some thought that it was meant for the quality of the powder that might have been here, that it needed longer to ignite. This is made for going out and hunting, and it could be used for your militia service. That's made for military use.
Joel and Doug have been meticulously testing these muskets to see the damage they could inflict. They've fired live rounds against targets replicating sections of 18th century houses, and also ballistic gel representing human flesh, carefully recording the effect of impact on different objects. Now, I'm going to have a go. So I'm just in a shooting position at the moment. Joel is loading the musket. I'm then going to take it and fire a musket ball fire round down the range. And we've got a replica of a panel, the side of a house, an 18th century house. So that famous wooden clapboard, the New England clapboard, some cladding, and then a panel behind. And we'll see what damage it does.
All right, here's the Brown Bess. It's on half cock. All you need to bring it back to full cock is everyone have their air protection on. Ready? Ready to fire anytime you are.
Okay. Luckily I hit it. That would have been too embarrassing. It's a big old hole, isn't it, Doug?
It is a large hole, and nice and round, just like it should be.
Okay.
Yeah, that looks great.
Daylight behind now. This is always the telling thing. Let's do. Ooh, wow.
Yeah, blew the whole side out there.
Look at that, as ever, it's these splinters that come out the back that are just
right at the
devastating.
feather joint.
Firing a series of shots gives a clear image of what happened when a Brown Bess is aimed at 18th century walls. Okay, it's the fowling piece next, the provincial's weapon.
Okay, there's the fowler on half cock.
A slightly smaller hole.
Of course, smaller ball.
Smaller ball, yeah.
Went right through.
Came out there and it produced some nasty splinters like this one here. So if you're within a meter or two, these could be as deadly as the bullet.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can imagine that musket ball going straight through the room, spraying splinters as it goes. Terrifying.
Yeah.
It's easy to kind of look back on this period 250 years ago and think it's all somehow a little bit primitive or romantic, but these are killing weapons.
Yeah, certainly.
And we have to remember, these are not antique weapons. Then, they are the latest technology these folks were using, both for hunting, but in particular for the combat on April 19th. So they are using the latest technology available to them.
You just think about the fact that here we are shooting at, house sections and wood, but there were human beings that were killed that day and really badly wounded by these weapons.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, guys. You can read those sources, you can look at those images, but when you're on the range, you're hearing it, you're feeling it, it's a very different experience. The results of Joel and Doug's tests have enabled a precise comparison with the battle damage that can still be found in the Jason Russell house. The building tells a bloody story. Hey, Joel.
Hey.
So is this how the room would have been furnished in 1775?
Very close to this, yep.
It's a great preservation. And what's this here?
That is a musket ball hole, probably fired by the British regulars from out in the yard out to over there. So we insert a trajectory rod like the forensic shooting incident reconstruction people use, put a laser on and shoot across the room to see where it might have come in, within a 5-degree error.
So Joel, people are pretty rude about these 18th century muskets, but that's punched through one wall and is on the way through another. That's a lot of stopping power.
It is, and he may have been out in the yard or out on the road but it still had enough velocity to go through the clapboard, sheathing, lath and plaster, and strike this panel, go through more lath and plaster, and hit something on the other side. We've gone through every inch of the house, recorded all the bullet strikes, but we've also recorded them in other homes and artifacts and objects.
The bullet holes and other damage here match the tests from the firing range. This is all evidence of hard fighting. It shows that when the British arrived here, they were using highly aggressive street fighting tactics to prevent sniper attacks from the surrounding buildings.
So as the regulars are marching back towards Boston, they've deployed flankers on either side of the road, and what they're doing is they're shooting at the houses to make sure they're not being shot at. They're shooting at the windows, for the most part, and doors. They're coming inside the houses, looting the houses, and trying to light them on fire. We know from an account from an unknown British officer who wrote a letter that he talked about trying to get into this house and 3 soldiers around him being killed as he tried to get in here. So yeah, there's a lot of fighting going on right in this area.
And there's a loss of command and control in the British regulars, and they're tired, they're angry, they're frustrated, and it shows in this intensity of fighting increasing here.
And that brutal fighting is apparent throughout the house. We're following the track of the musket ball that made the holes in the parlour walls.
So we've just come out of the parlour. It's come through this wall here. So
Right.
does it go through that door or anything like that?
So it came through this panel on the other side of the parlor, through the lath and plaster, and struck the newel post right there.
Oh, this thing here?
Yeah, striking the edge of the newel post and passing through, and then out here is where it's blown out the wood, and then passed on out at an angle and to where we don't know.
Because now we're in the centre of the house. This just shows nowhere safe. There's just lead balls traversing the entire property.
It's amazing to see the marks of a vicious firefight still preserved 250 years later.
But the family owned the house for well into the 19th century, almost to the beginning of the 20th century. And they've preserved this. It meant something to them to preserve this damage and tell their own story.
The work on the firing range and here in the Jason Russell house has enabled the brutal story of what happened here 250 years ago to be pieced together like a crime scene. Joel and Doug have created this trajectory plan mapping all the bullet tracks discovered. Some of the shots were fired once the British regulars got inside the building.
Let's take a look on the other side of this door.
Open this door. Where's this go to?
So this is
the basement.
This is the door to the cellar. On April 19th, there were a group of soldiers from Beverly who were pushed inside the house, went down in the cellar, and pointed their guns back up towards the stairs. British soldiers came into the kitchen and fired through the door. They knew they were down there. I'm trying to kill some of these men from Beverly. There's a secondary source that says one of the Beverly men fired back through the door and killed one of the British regulars. We don't know whether that's true or not. You can see there's a shot right behind the door trim here.
Oh, that's very clear, yeah. Big bullet hole there.
And then if you look to your right, you've got a bullet hole through the stair riser.
Oh, yeah.
And then another one just to the right, below that one. 2 of the musket balls went through the stair riser and would have lodged in the lath and plaster on the other side.
So there are bullets, again, crisscrossing this house. So this is, we're talking house to house, room to room. There were people in this room with muskets shooting through doors.
Yeah, and if you think about the length of a musket with a bayonet on their gun, they're shooting from right here through the door.
And firing in there, so the noise and the smoke, and they fired multiple shots, as you can see from the holes in this room.
Jason Russell, who owned this structure, he was killed. We don't know whether he was a combatant or not. More than likely he wasn't, but he was killed right here in his own house, possibly right outside the front door. And after the fighting had passed, the 12 men that had been killed in and around, provincial men who had been killed in and around the yard, were brought into this kitchen and laid out on the floor. And there's a 19th century account that says Mrs. Russell came home and the blood was ankle deep. There's another account from a guy from Groton, Massachusetts, who was here, who actually came into the house, and he said that the blood was half over shoes. It must have been a horrific sight to come into this room and see that much blood and these dead bodies, not including the British soldiers and dead animals who were scattered all over the property.
So this is just one house along this long route. The intensity of it, just clearing houses, fighting these skirmishes again and again.
Definitely, there was a trail of destruction.
Clearly, by the late afternoon of the 19th of April, this would have been a killing field. Just looking around the Jason Russell house, seeing that damage, you realise that it wasn't just the air that was filled with musket balls. They were actually ripping through the fabric of buildings as well. And unsurprisingly, there were the corpses to match. We hear that there was something like 11 provincials lying dead in the yard here. 2 British soldiers, a Marine and a Grenadier, were killed as they stormed this building and this little area. Got an account from a Boston minister. He walked along the battlefield the following day and simply said, "Dreadful were the vestiges of war."
After the violent house-to-house fighting and monotony, the British battled, burned, and looted their way back towards Boston. The Redcoats finally reached the relative safety of Charleston as dusk fell. Eventually, they were ferried back to Boston. To put the momentous events of the day in perspective, I'm meeting up again with Jonathan Bratton on the Battle Road.
Well, that leaves both sides thinking, my God, what happened? You know, what from the provincial side, what did we just do? We can't fight the British Empire alone. And so they're going to send messages out to their neighboring colonies around New England, but also to the Continental Congress to say, this is your fight just as much as it is our fight.
I can't think of many days in British or American history where so much changes so radically in such a short space of time.
18 April, things are sort of business as usual, a little tense, unsure of what's going to happen, but then the next day you are in complete political crisis mode. This is supposed to show the power of the crown, and instead you've got the sight of the British Army running.
It has been a fascinating journey along the Battle Road of April the 19th, 1775, exploring the emerging evidence of events right here. Evidence that has enabled us to explore exactly what happened on that momentous day 250 years ago. It is famous for the shot heard round the world at the Old North Bridge, Concord. But in fact, it was the shots heard all along this road and the wider context of that time of exceptional change that altered the course of history and set Britain and America on very different roads.
One of the big changes that happens on April 19th is at the end of the day when Gage is writing his report, he is referring to the enemy. It's not a word he had used before, that these people he's trying to govern are the enemy. But on April 19th, it becomes really clear that there are two sides.
By the time they reach Charleston, there are 3,600 provincials following the 1,700 soldiers. And that's a statement about how well organized these people really were. War was going to break out, and it did on April 19th.
The day starts out almost as a policing action from the British perspective and even the militia perspective, protecting law and order. And by the end of the day, there only seems one recourse left, and that's war.
Coming soon, I investigate the first pitched battle of the American Revolution, Bunker Hill, when Redcoats advanced into a wall of fire. In Massachusetts, there stands an obelisk high on a hill overlooking the city of Boston. Building began on the 17th of June, 1825, on the 50th anniversary of a bloody event that happened right here. The Battle of Bunker Hill.
This is the gigantic monument to the Battle of Bunker Hill, the first big pitched battle of the American Revolutionary War. It was technically a British victory, but as you can see, it was the Americans who were celebrating.
I'm starting my exploration by following in the footsteps of just about every other visitor who has come here. Guiding me is someone who's climbed to the top many times, National Parks Ranger, Savannah Rose.
Right. Hey, what a view!
Yes.
This is the ideal viewing platform. This is great.
It is, yeah. This is why people always come to Bunker Hill and climb the monuments.
And so that was downtown Boston back in 1775.
Yep, Charles River, you can see it right in front of us, would have been a lot larger during the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775. The entire landscape would have looked a lot different. There's a lot more water, a lot less land.
And so which direction are the redcoats coming from?
The redcoats, so they're besieged in Boston, but they're primarily going to be coming from this direction over here.
Wow, that's a great view of Boston Harbor.
Right in front of us is the Charlestown Navy Yard. From here, we can see a really great view of where the reinforcements are landing. The main British force, they're actually going to be landing on a point called Morton's Point, which is just a little bit this way.
So there would have been British naval vessels out here, and they're providing their artillery support, they're shooting.
Absolutely. Where the monument stands today is supposed to be in the middle of the redoubt that would have been built under the command of Colonel William Prescott. It was built on the night of June 16th. The men who are building this redoubt are exhausted. They haven't eaten since the day before. They're tired. And now, dawn of June 17th, they're expected to fight a battle.
How did it all reach this point, with the British bottled up in Boston and provincial troops surrounding the city? What led to the fighting on this hill? I've already explored events 2 months earlier, walking the Battle Road from Boston to Concord and back, finding out about the Minutemen and retracing the running battle of the 19th of April, 1775. At the end of that day, the British had fled across the Charles River and back into Boston. They controlled the seas around Massachusetts, but very little of the land. Boston had become their prison, but they were determined to break out. By this point in 1775, the troops in Boston were British Army regulars, shipped in from the motherland. But earlier, the military had been drawn from loyal units of local people, like the 1st Corps of Cadets. I've come to their museum in downtown Boston, meeting curator Michelle Abrams.
So tell me about this unit. They start out as loyal to the governor and the crown.
Absolutely. So when they first start out in 1741, they were actually the royal governor's bodyguards. Okay. And so they were the elite unit of Boston. And the way they did that was they were essentially the richest men in Boston and their sons. And so the royal governor wanted something similar to the Coldstream Guards, but couldn't quite get the Coldstream Guard.
That's why I recognize your badge.
Yes.
So it's deliberately imitating the elite units of the British Army, the oldest units in the army.
But these once loyal units had turned away from the British government, led by some key names who would feature in the Revolution.
John Hancock, being the 5th commander of the 1st Corps of Cadets, was also a son of liberty. And while he was trying to play both sides in the early days, it turned out that after the Boston Tea Party, he just decided we're done and split.
And so in the end, Governor Gage just says to Hancock, sorry, you cannot command this unit.
Yes. So this is the dismissal letter from Thomas Gage to General Hancock.
Okay, so this is August 1st, 1774, and it says sir, but it's to...
It's to Colonel Hancock,
Colonel Hancock. I'm directed by His Excellency the Captain General, so Gage, to acquaint you that he has no further service for you as captain of the Governor's Company of Cadets, and you are hereby dismissed from that command. I am, sir, your most obedient, humble servant. That's a very curt dismissal.
I call it the most formal dismissal with pettiness I've ever seen.
Once Hancock had been dismissed, most of the cadets' loyalties switched to the revolutionary side, and they needed a change from their old British-style uniform.
John Hancock, before he went off and did Continental Congress things, said, well, we need something. And so he went to a friend that was a tailor, and since there was still taxes and the ports were closed, they could not necessarily get a lot of dye. So he had black. It was the option that they had. And so they created these black uniforms. So you have the black here, and then you have the red almost as defying the British, right?
Yeah.
We're going to still use parts of the uniforms. So they trimmed it here in red. And then eventually they did go to the Washington blue color that most people know for the Continental Army, just kind of to blend in a little bit more.
By June 1775, the British governor, Thomas Gage, was under ever-increasing pressure from his masters in London to save Boston and take back control of New England. But he's surrounded by provincial forces. No one really knows what will happen next.
Neither side really has a plan for what happens when a war begins. And as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until someone punches you in the face. And that's what we see each side responding to now.
So Boston is not a great place to keep an army in a siege.
Boston has a lot of shortcomings for being a base for an army. First, of course, you have the fact that the population is very much on the other side. And that's something Gage recognizes, and they all see that Boston isn't the best place from which to win back the loyalty of the rest of the Americans. New England is pretty much a lost cause. Also, it is a small place. It's a small peninsula. Most of the firewood, the food, and other things in Boston come from the surrounding towns, which are now being held by these enemy militia.
The British were contained in Boston, surrounded by provincial forces. But around the 13th of June 1775, the besiegers heard the British were planning to break out. It was time for the New Englanders to seize the initiative and get Boston and the Royal Navy within range of their artillery. For this, they needed to take control of the Charlestown Peninsula. Their next step was an audacious move, carried out secretly under cover of darkness through the night of June 16. To explore the shock that greeted the British as the new day dawned on June 17th, I've returned to Bunker Hill Memorial to meet with military historian Jonathan Bratton.
So if you're Thomas Gage, you wake up that morning to the gunfire of the Royal Navy that's waking you up, and you look through your spyglass and you see that this, what once was a collection of farm fields with some fences around it, there's this 8-foot tall fortified position that's been thrown up overnight, which is kind of incredible, really, that you've got about 900 to 1,200 troops that come up, and during the night they build a small fort, both for infantry, and you could possibly mount artillery in here. And artillery, as always, is the thing that the British are most concerned about. Gage writes prior to Lexington and Concord, his adjutant tells him, hey, the Americans can field 20,000 troops, and Gage goes, I don't care about that. But if they have artillery, they can form a field army.
And that's intolerable for the British. You cannot allow them to dominate this important feature by building basically a small fort on top.
It's really a provocative statement to the British that they're going to fortify a position that's within cannon shot of Boston that can challenge the mobility and supremacy of the Royal Navy out here if you get heavy guns up here.
So if you've got heavy guns up here on Bunker Hill...
This is Breed's Hill. Bunker Hill's this way because, you know, nothing makes sense in history, right? It's one of those locations of, yeah, we call it this, but it's actually this.
Okay, classic.
Yeah.
One of the many battlefields that's called by an adjacent name. Okay, we're on this hill. The guns up here can pound Boston or make life untenable for these naval ships that are operating in these waters around here, bringing supplies.
And remember, the only reason that the British Army can maintain itself and all the loyalists in Boston is that Royal Navy lifeline. So if Gage loses that, then they have to evacuate Boston. And a little bit, you know, closer to home, from a sort of pride perspective, you can't have these rebels just out here just building this fortification and let nothing happen.
You're right up in the grill.
You're within visibility of everybody. And so the whole city of Boston's watching. Everyone in Massachusetts is watching. It becomes a psychological issue as well as a practical military problem. And so from a British perspective, you then have to figure out, what do you do? And poor Thomas Gage, he received a rather unwelcome reinforcement just after Lexington and Concord of 4 other generals to help him.
A lot of generals cooped up in Boston,
and
there's a lot of time on their hands.
Yeah, that's not a good thing for really anybody. So this is one of the most public battles actually in the history of the Revolution, because it's happening right under everybody's noses.
Although taken by surprise, the British swiftly put their own plan into action, aiming to attack the new colonial redoubt both by land and sea, and sweep onwards. By midday, their forces were mobilized. By 2 p.m., British forces were landing on the peninsula. The Navy transported around 1,500 troops across the water from Boston. Warships were positioned to bombard the colonial fortifications and fire on any reinforcements trying to cross the neck north of the newly built hilltop defences. The British infantry advance began from their landing northeast of Charlestown. The Colonials had the advantage of a higher fortified position, but the British regulars had received relentless drilling and training. I've already seen the terrible damage that 18th century flintlock muskets could inflict in my film On the Battle Road of April 19th, 1775.
Ooh,
wow.
Yeah, blew the whole side out.
To find out how the troops were drilled to do this in battle, I'm joining His Majesty's 33rd Regiment of Foot, who faithfully reenact the British forces of the Revolutionary War.
Hello, Sergeant.
Hello, Dan. Pleased to meet you.
Reporting for duty. You want to train me up?
Well, welcome to His Majesty's 33rd. I'm Sergeant Ashby, your platoon sergeant. So, first of all, we're going to need some accoutrements, a set of belts. So, you've got the waist belt worn over the right shoulder.
Like this?
Yeah, and that's got one of the most important items. That's the bayonet.
Yeah.
So just onto there. And then your pouch with your rounds of ball cartridge. That's going to go over the
those are my
side.
bullets and gunpowder, basically.
That's it.
Yeah, right.
Rounds of ball cartridge, your powder and your ball all in one there.
Right. Okay, what's next?
Okay, so the Shortland pattern brown bess.
The famous brown bess.
Well, that's the nickname. Technically, it's the firelock as far as the army is concerned.
Standard issue British Army fire.
The Shortland pattern.
Okay, this is famously complicated to load, isn't it?
Not particularly.
Right.
It's as a recruit in England, you would have been drilled 3 times a day on this. So by the time you are joining in America, you are well proficient in the use of this.
Okay, well, why don't we start that process?
Right. So first of all, well, it's we need to bring the chaps here to squad parade.
Right.
Handle arms.
Oh.
And we're going to go to shoulder. So if you watch the gentleman just on there.
And by the way, we're staying this close together, are we?
Well, the doctrine is as so, and you at shoulder to shoulder.
Okay. And is that because it's easier to move men round on the battlefield if they're all?
It certainly is. So if you imagine in blocks, a battalion of anywhere between 6 or 1,000 men in 3 or 2 ranks, it's easier to manoeuvre them in blocks, companies, or platoons. So we're going to go up to the shoulder in 3 motions. Shoulder, firelocks. 1, 2, 3. Good. We've counted the curtains there to make it easy for you.
Yep.
Good. You've got your hand inside of there. Now we're going to go to the loading position. Recover arms. That's it. Bring it up to this. That's it. You've got it slightly over towards your left.
Yep.
Take care to load. Load. Go to the loading position. Step back with your right.
Right. So here
you need to bring this frizzen forward first of all.
We're putting gunpowder in this little pan here,
yes.
aren't we?
Yep. That's right.
The flint causes a spark on there, which ignites the powder, goes through the hole, and ignites the main powder in there. Bullet comes out the end.
And 1 dead rebel.
Yes.
So in your own time, gentlemen, prime and load. So you would take.
We're imagining take the charge out.
Bite the top off.
Right.
Good. 2 good slugs of powder. Don't overprime it.
Okay.
Shut the pan.
Okay, gunpowder's in that now.
And cast about. Take the charge. Put it down the barrel.
Yeah, the charge with the musket ball.
That's it. Then take your ram out. Ram out. in your own time now. So we're admitting all the drill manoeuvres, load it down.
And if you don't do this in sync with the other guys, you could whack someone in the face.
That we learned very, very quickly in America. It's the speed is all. Okay. Shoulder, firelocks.
Right. Oh,
that's
there
it.
we go.
Turn it out. Recover. Arms. Up to the side. Yeah, your left side.
Yep.
Cock. Firelocks. So push down. Present. Take a step back with your right foot. Fire. Recover. Arms. So that's the dry run.
And how many times a minute am I going to go through that? How long does that all take, would you say, by seasoned professionals?
If you were going to remember the drill books of the time in this for His Majesty's Army is the 1764 Manual of Exercise. It's you would have been taught very piecemeal, slow and steady, so it's quite a slow rate of fire. But there is absolutely no reason why, as a veteran, certainly in America, you'd get 3 rounds a minute at least.
3 rounds a minute. So that whole thing should take 20 seconds. So we're in 2 ranks, maybe 3 ranks, just firing lead in solid blocks down the battlefield towards the enemy.
In simple terms, yes.
Quick, march. Next step in my training is blank firing in battle formation.
Right, Dan, I'm going to get you fall into the platoon now.
Okay, here we go.
Put you on the right marker, Ashbolt to the rear.
So you want me here?
Step yourself in, yeah, so you're on the right of the platoon now, so they'll be forming on you.
Great.
Platoon, take care to fix your bayonets. Fix bayonets. And bring your firelock down to the side, take the bayonet out.
It's a vicious thing, isn't it? This is a brutal bit of razor-sharp steel.
It is.
And is this because we're not just shooting at the enemy, we're hoping to close them and, well, stab them?
Shoulder, arms. Absolutely, it's the rush of the bayonet.
So the idea is a volley or 2 or 3 volleys, and then you get close up and personal.
It's the hallmark of all British infantry in America, Dan. It's we give them a volley, surprise them, don't give them any time to recover, and then in with the bayonet. On the right, dress in order. But tune in your own time, prime and load. Shake it down, make sure it's all down. Listen for Sir's orders. Ready? Stand! Fire! Shoulder! Firelocks!
Well, that was very impressive. You get a sense of just the explosive power that an entire battalion could have deployed.
It was absolutely devastating.
Except, I guess, at Bunker Hill, the problem is the enemy are up a hill and they are behind they're behind fixed defences, aren't they?
That's right, and then remember you've got mounting casualties, so you're marching over your own dead comrades and the wounded, trying to keep formation and trying to get close enough to engage in volleys.
The enemy are only, 50 metres away or so, and they're shooting back at you and you're trying to go through all those different complicated motions. Extraordinary, isn't it? The discipline.
Absolutely, and that's the hallmark of the British soldier.
On June 17th, 1775, the redoubt the British were attacking stood right on the top of Breed's Hill. It's been much changed over the centuries. The farmland is long gone, and the summit has been lowered. Today, it's surrounded by brownstone houses, but you can still get a good idea of the challenge that faced the regulars, fighting uphill against a determined, well-defended position. 250 years later, Jonathan Bratton and I are retracing their advance.
So those redcoats would have been labouring up from the water right the way to the summit of this hill.
It is in the 80s and 90s. You know, heavy. They're still in full kit, and I don't think a bunch of them don't even drop packs. And so you're burdening through this tall grass. It's farm fields, so there's fences,
right.
And so you're pushing up against all this, and no one's even shooting at you yet, and you're exhausted.
And we're now, what, 50 metres or so from that redoubt, so now they come under very heavy musketry fire, I guess.
Yes, and what they would have already begin to hear is that even before they engage, is that down there along the river, the light infantry have begun and are making their assault against the rock wall along the Mystic River.
The colonials had seen there was a risk that the redoubt on the hill could be outflanked, so they'd sent troops to defend this line. The British attacked here with light infantry. They advanced into a hail of fire.
You know the line, what's the famous Bunker Hill line?
Oh, don't shoot to the whites of their eyes.
That's right. Well, we don't actually know that anyone said that. What we do know is cooler. So down along the waterline, you have John Stark. He is a veteran of the French and Indian War. He was a ranger. He's engaged in a lot of combat. And so he takes what he learned from that to his New Hampshire troops who are along the waterline. They're lined up in 3 ranks behind a stone wall, and he places pieces of birch bark, about 20 to 30 paces in front of his men. And he says, when you see their gaiters pass the birch bark, fire and aim at the gaiters, because he knows that they're raw troops, which means that by the time they pull the trigger, the barrel will have drifted up to the crossbelt and center mass. The 4th King's Own Light Company takes 85% casualties in about 30 seconds. Here.
So we're talking First World War levels of death and destruction.
Of carnage.
The British had failed to outflank the hill, but now they sent in their first assault on the redoubt above them. The ranks of tightly packed redcoats met volleys of fire.
The overwhelming urge is to halt and return fire, and that means you give up the momentum. Their officers order them to withdraw, and they continue, they fall back down the hill to begin to reset.
Okay, but they come again. The first wave had been beaten back under the weight of fire from above. This near-contemporary engraving captures the carnage that took place on the hillside. Now the Royal Navy began to fire on Charlestown, setting the town alight. And across the water in Boston, through the smoke, Governor Gage could hear and catch glimpses of the mayhem unfolding. But on the battlefield, the British officers rallied their men for a second assault, back up the hill.
They come again. So now, once again, this is supposed to be an attack that is supported by artillery, right? You're supposed to bring your field guns forward. Well, they're 6-pounders, and they pack 12-pound ammunition.
Oh, no.
So they don't even have artillery support for the advance.
So this hillside here is strewn with corpses.
And it is in the second attack that you have General Howe standing alone amongst what used to be his staff and his soldiers, and it's just him. Everyone else is killed or wounded. And he's somehow walking out of there unscathed, and that's going to be a thing that stays with him really for the rest of the war. But this second assault is beaten back.
So back down the hill they go.
Back down the hill you go.
The Battle of Bunker Hill was becoming an archetypal meat grinder. Soldiers being willingly sacrificed to achieve the leader's objective at any cost. Incredibly, the British rallied for a final all-out assault. This had become a fight to the bitter end.
And so with this next time, Howe gives the order for his soldiers to drop their packs. The last assault goes forward with orders to maneuver everyone, focus on the redoubt. Everyone close in and then close with the bayonet.
And so this third attempt, they're now stepping over the corpses of their fallen comrades. Are they going to get to that breastwork? Are they going to finally break into these defenses?
There is a volley that sort of staggers them here, but they press on. Wow. They press up, and now they're under the walls of the redoubt, and they're over the edge. Major Pitcairn, who we remember from Lexington and Concord, is killed on the redoubt.
So eventually, on the third attempt, they get up here, they get over this redoubt, they get in amongst the enemy, and then it's time for bayonet.
It is. They've been trained, they're professionals. They've spent hours training on bayonet drill for just this exact purpose. Most of the American soldiers don't have bayonets, so it's a pretty unequal fight.
So at the end of the day, the British have control of this hill, but
they do.
It's a victory, but it's not one to celebrate.
It is one more such victory, I think, as Gage says, and we wouldn't have an army. It's absolutely it's shocking casualty numbers.
It is estimated that the British lost over 1,000 men that day, 226 dead and 828 wounded. A disproportionate number were officers. It was the highest casualty count they suffered in a single encounter in the entire Revolutionary War. Colonial losses were about 450, of whom 140 were killed, mostly during the final stand and retreat. The British had paid a brutal price for their victory on this hill. They simply couldn't afford to lose that number of irreplaceable men. The Americans, by contrast, they had plenty more troops and plenty more hilltops to fortify. The British had to accept they simply weren't going to fight their way out of their predicament here in Boston. They were trapped. And there was a new colonial leader on his way to take on the British. A Virginian, sent by the Continental Congress, a military man who'd cut his teeth fighting for the British against the French. He assembled his new troops here on Cambridge Common, just a few miles from Boston. It was on this spot, on the 4th of July, 1775, that the men of the newly formed American Army, the army of the combined American colonies, gathered together to be inspected by their new commander. His name was George Washington. Washington had quite a challenge on his hands. These troops parading in front of him on the 4th of July 1775 were still a ragtag army, made up of militias from across New England and beyond, all with their own leaders and modus operandi. The new commander-in-chief set up his headquarters here in this large house on the edge of Cambridge. And why did he choose this house?
So this house had already been occupied by several Patriot leaders from the brand new Continental Army up to this point. But if you see where we are, we're on a hill, right? You can look down, you can see down to the Charles River.
Yeah.
You can see Boston. So you can see his army and his siege lines.
So this would have been the beating heart of an army. It would have been a hive activity.
The operations center. So think about the people who are critical to the revolution. So John Adams will come through here with Abigail. You know, they'll come and they'll have dinner. Benedict Arnold will come in here and say, "Hey, sir, I've got this great idea. We should invade Canada." This is where you've got Native American representatives from the Eastern Indian nations who are coming down to say, "Hey, we think what you're doing, we actually kind of agree with it. We'd like to fight with you." So it's a diplomatic hub, it's a military hub, and it's also a house. I mean, this is where he's going to get his few moments of peace if he ever slept at all. But this is it. This is the operations center for the Continental Army.
So what's the reaction when George Washington shows up?
Well, it's twofold, right? You've got, first of all, an army that still isn't really an army. So it's a lot of, who is this guy? Why is this Virginian showing up? And then also I think there's a bit of a sort of a relief of, oh, a Virginian's showing up. If a Virginian is showing up to take command, maybe that means Virginia is going to send troops. Maybe that means Maryland and Pennsylvania and the rest of the colonies will send troops, and it won't just be a New England army sort of here doing, as they see it, all the heavy lifting.
So depending on your point of view, you can either see this as a positive way of America coming together, or you think, hang on a minute, we've done all the legwork and now it's Virginians coming up to take the glory.
Yeah, I think we often forget that the 13 colonies of 1775 were much more like 13 almost independent sort of principalities or countries who are very different, who have very different ways of seeing things, seeing the world specifically. The fact that he's a Virginian is definitely going to cause friction, especially as more and more units from other colonies arrive through the summer of 1775, where he's not just dealing with these New Englanders who think that he's a stuck-up Virginian, he's dealing with his own Virginians, the backwoodsmen from Virginia who think that he's a stuck-up Virginian. And in fact, he has more trouble with them. Honestly, they're literally brawling. He has to go out and separate them. And that's another thing that an army commander should probably be doing. And anecdotes like that give you an idea of just the colossal challenge he faces here.
Washington knew he needed to act fast and decisively to create an army that could take on the British for the duration of what could be a long war. He set about stamping his authority on his new command.
So he's going to immediately come in and just issue just sort of a lot of a stream of orders, I think, is a good way to depict what's coming from his headquarters at this time.
So is he coming in and bringing some sort of organizing genius to the operational plan? Like, let's do this and let's do that? Or is he just trying to professionalize things?
His job is to essentially create order out of chaos, essentially, of establishing discipline, standardization to the army. He can't even think about the British. One of the initial orders that comes out of his house is for the soldiers of the army to stop, I believe it says, perniciously defecating around the landscape. So you have to do something to keep disease from spreading.
It doesn't sound very glamorous, but that will kill an army faster than the enemy.
You've got about 20,000 people who are coming and going as they please, many of them, who there's not a big sense of discipline. This is a New England army. They see themselves as individuals, and so officers will talk to their men on a first-name basis, and Washington's like, nope, that's not how we do things. There has to be, there has to be a chain of command, a strata, so to speak.
And they want to go and shoot Brits. They don't want to dig latrines.
You don't want to dig latrines. They don't want to dig embrasures for guns. They don't want to build fortifications. And so what you actually have most of the time, Washington doesn't come in and say, all right, well, this operational plan, I will win the war. Really, the only way to bring this siege to an end is to challenge Britain's sea power, and the only way to do that is to mount heavy guns on commanding terrain that will make the the Royal Navy's presence in the harbor untenable, that they will have to go out to sea or risk losing their ships.
So George Washington, it's great generalship. It might not be moving troops around a battlefield like Napoleon or Alexander the Great, but it's incredibly effective. He achieves the task he sets out to do.
He does, and it's not glamorous, and it's not what he conceives of as generalship. He always wants to have had the attack on Boston. Washington's greatest genius through the entire war, and here, is keeping an army together and keeping an army in the field.
Siege was maintained through the winter of 1775 to 76. But what Washington really needed was more heavy artillery. A surprise raid by colonial forces had captured 59 cannon from the British Fort Ticonderoga, over 300 miles away, near Lake Champlain. The guns were then transported through the freezing winter on sleds, all the way to the siege of Boston. By March 1776, they were ready to be turned on the British. Meanwhile, the new Continental Army had built fortifications all around the city, including key high points like Dorchester Heights. These kept the British troops and ships trapped within artillery range. One of those new forts was on Prospect Hill.
Well, this is such a powerful position, isn't it, John? You've got Boston over there, and this kind of dominates this whole peninsula, the Cambridge-Charleston Peninsula.
We're up here on Prospect Hill, which becomes this huge fortified camp, or really a large fortification eventually, a star fort built up here to really be the heart of the siege of Boston.
And if British ships try and get up here, you can bombard them. If British troops come up here and try and get into Massachusetts proper, they're not going to get past this.
The incongruous mock medieval castle that now stands on Prospect Hill was built in the 19th century as a memorial. But the Revolutionary War fortress was a far more pragmatic earth and wood structure designed to house heavy guns and withstand artillery fire.
This is the product of months of these regiments coming in from the state, and you do service on the fort on Prospect Hill. You'll dig ditches, you'll dig entrenchments, you'll do improvements to fortifications, you'll rotate out to somewhere else in the line, you'll come back, you'll serve as gunners, you'll exchange volleys with British ships or other artillery pieces, but most of the time you're really bored. And Washington realizes this, and he also realizes it's January in New England, it's cold, so there needs to be something to boost the morale of his soldiers. And so what he does is he runs up the first sort of national flag, the flag of Grand Union, which is flying above us right now, but it looks, as you can see, a little familiar.
Yeah, it feels to me like there's a little chance of compromise still in that flag.
It does. It's got it's got your flag up there in the corner, and there's this sort of idea of who are we? And of course, remember, it's the beginning of 1776. It's going to take another 6 months for the Continental Congress to say, yes, we are something new.
We're breaking away.
We are breaking away. But this becomes, it's a very symbolic flag here, and is going to be replaced by the much more recognizable Betsy Ross flag the following year.
But what you're looking at here in Boston is a militarized landscape, engineering, huge organization, cannon, logistics. This is a sort of recognizable European big war, isn't it?
It is. In 6 months, you've gone from sort of this low-intensity conflict to suddenly you're doing conventional warfare, siege warfare, which is very complex.
And these part-timers have got the British Army bottled up. I mean, that's crazy.
It's a little inconceivable, and that's how sort of Whitehall is seeing it as well. They're going, what? Commanders in Boston, do something.
But apart from relatively unsuccessful raids for food and firewood, there was very little the British could do. The Royal Navy still controlled the harbour, but was coming under increasing pressure from American privateers on the high seas. Supplies in Boston were running out.
After Bunker Hill, I think the Boston really is doomed from the British point of view. The generals realize this. This is not a tenable position from which to win back the loyalty of the American people. New York, Charleston, Savannah, these would be much more salubrious places for the British operations. People in those places really want to remain loyal to the crown. What we should do is pull out of Boston, but politically we can't do that because the British have just sent this big army, and now if suddenly we retreat, what's that going to say to the British public? So it's a military problem that they have. That is, this isn't a good position, but it's also a political problem. And in March of 1776, Washington has the artillery placed at Dorchester Heights in what's now South Boston, and that gives General Howe the military pretext to leave Boston.
With this threat of heavy artillery, Boston could not hold out any longer. A secret deal was made. The British troops and remaining loyalists could pull out unmolested if they didn't burn the city as they went. At dawn on March 17, 1776, 11,000 soldiers and civilians boarded Royal Navy ships in Boston Harbor and left the city forever.
Yeah, the evacuation of Boston is the first American victory in this war that's going to go on for another 8 years. Lexington and Concord was a skirmish, Bunker Hill, the end of the day, the British hold the ground, but after March 17, 1776, the British have evacuated Boston and will not return. It is the day of Massachusetts' independence from the British Empire.
The War of Independence moved on, away from Boston. But this great house in Cambridge played one more role in defining and perhaps romanticizing the revolutionary events of 1775 and 1776 that had happened here in Massachusetts.
George Washington's headquarters here in Cambridge would also be important in American history for a very different reason. Nearly 100 years later, it would become the family home of one of America's most important poets, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And ironically, it was here that he wrote a poem all about 1775 that became a classic and elevated one of the participants to legendary status, making him one of the most famous Americans. Paul Revere, the man, or one of the men, who took news of the Redcoats' departure from Boston, giving warning. And it begins, "Listen, my children, you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." And it ends, "Through all our history till the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeat of that steed and the midnight passage of Paul Revere." Sometimes poets and playwrights, and even some historians, like to pick out individuals in the past and credit them with having an outside influence on the great sweep of history. But what 1775 really teaches me is that these events were driven by the thousands of people who all played their part. From the Minutemen to the Redcoats to the population of Boston, yes, the great leaders, but also the men and women who dig out the siege works and keep the armies supplied. It was thanks to that collective effort that the Americans took Boston. Hi there, I'm Dan Snow, and if you love history, you know that History Hit is on a mission to bring the past to life. Every week, we travel the world to film original and in-depth documentaries. And now History Hit has launched a YouTube membership to give you access to even more films released weekly. You heard it here first, folks. Join now to make sure you never miss out on exclusive documentaries on topics like newly discovered shipwrecks or the clash of gladiators. We cover all periods, from Pompeii to D-Day. Click the join button below this video and see for yourself what History Hit has to offer. We can't wait to have you join the team.